Today I'm with Sarmad from LastMile AI. Sarmad, I'll hand it over to you to take over.
Thanks, Mayo. Thanks for having me, and great to chat here. The thing I wanted to talk to you about today was how you build generative AI applications with this open source framework we have called AIConfig. Just a quick thing about LastMile AI. We're a New York City-based startup, and the entire team has been focused on machine learning and data science developer tools in the past. And what we're seeing with generative AI is that it's full stack software engineers who are at the forefront of building generative AI applications. Many of these folks are not ML experts, and so we're trying to build a new set of developer tools for full stack software developers to be able to build generative AI applications reliably. And so just to show you what that actually looks like, I'm going to switch right back into VS Code. And we have this extension called the AIConfig Editor, as well as an open source framework called AIConfig. What that is simply this JSON or YAML format that allows you to save the prompts you're running a model with, what the model you're running, and the settings associated with that model, all in a config file. And then you have an SDK that you can load this config into code and run it. And what the extension lets you do in VS Code is you can open anything with aiconfig.yaml or aiconfig.json file, and it renders it as a notebook editor. And here I'll go into this the details of this prompt when we go over the workshop that we're going to do today. But you can run GPT 3.5 Turbo, for example, right inside VS Code. So the same things that you get in the OpenAI playground, you can kind of get it here. It's actually not even LLM specific. So here I have this Hugging Face specific AIConfig open. And you can kind of see that the input can be an image and the output can be text, or you have language translation going on, summarization, text to speech, speech to text, all sorts of different modalities can be defined and covered within an AIConfig. And it's all within the IDE. And so that kind of brings the prompt exploration and development phase of the generative AI development alongside the place where you do application development. And you have model selection across all sorts of model providers in a single playground interface, which doesn't exist today. So we're going to use AIConfig to kind of build the application that we're going to go through over the next a couple of minutes or so. And we're going to focus on how to evaluate a RAG application using model graded eval. And so you'll kind of see a couple of these evaluate prompts here, and we'll talk about how this is put together. Back to you, Mayo.
Awesome. So in a nutshell, how do you describe what LastMile does and how it can benefit the listeners?
Yeah, it's really about folks who are trying to productionize generative AI applications, whether they're an enterprise or they're trying to build their own apps. How do they do it reliably? It's kind of hard today because we're just pretty early on in the journey of generative AI development. And so the key things that we really focus on right now, one is what I showed you, the prompt and model exploration. So having that notebook editor for generative AI prompts right inside your IDE. The second is, now that you have these AIConfig files, you can store them in version control, which gives you more confidence in production. You can properly version your prompts and model settings. And if someone asks you, like, what are the generative AI settings that are associated with your application that's been deployed in production, you can literally like show them the git commit hash of those things and see how it changed over time. You can also share this AI artifact with teammates, so it allows you to have a more collaborative experience of developing AI applications. And you can use this in code, and it kind of creates this separation of concerns, which you can kind of see in this diagram here, where the application code is basically then just about the core business logic of your app. And you might be like fetching data from a data source, and then you just want to invoke a model. But how you invoke an OpenAI model versus a Claude Anthropic model, or Azure OpenAI versus Llama 2, all of that logic is then contained within the AIConfig itself and abstracted by the AIConfig SDK. So it just creates a more structured way and methodical way of doing generative AI development than what's possible today.
Awesome. Cool. Yeah.
Oh, sorry. I was thinking maybe I can just go over what the application I wanted to show you today is, and how we can build it all within VS Code. We're not going to go to any other playground or really like use anything except for our own developer environment. And so I was thinking we can build like a simple question answering app. I think your listeners are really well versed in general, and so they'll see that this is a very basic RAG application. It processes data from volume 7 of the history of the United States of America, which is basically a very large text file. And then the important part, though, is not the chunking strategy or not the RAG pipeline itself, but actually just like evaluating the responses of the RAG pipeline. And the 4 things we're going to measure it against are relevance. So are the answers relevant to the question that was asked? Are they coherent? So are they able to be easy to comprehend? Are they faithful to the vector embeddings that we fetched and passed in as context? And finally, are they succinct responses that are well structured based on some criteria? And then we'll try to improve the response quality as we go through that as well. How does that sound? Should we get started?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. So I want to spend most of my time in VS Code just to show you folks. So I already showed you this AI config that I've set up. There are a couple of things you'll notice here. First, to actually get this in your own environment, all you have to do is install the AI config extension from VS Code. And once you have that, you can just do AI config create new JSON, for example, and it'll just set up a brand new AI config for you. And you can say like, let's just do print hello world, for example, just to show you that how quick it is to get started. But this is not what we're going to work on today. What we have is already set up here. There's a link I'll send afterwards as well on where you can get this cookbook. But at a very high level, we have this prompt for generating a RAG kind of response where you give it a query and you give it context. You'll notice this handlebar syntax. And this is just a way of passing data into a prompt. So this is actually a prompt template. And then we have this concept of parameters. Here you can see like global parameters. And I've kind of hard-coded what the context I'm passing in for this playground environment is and what the query is. And you can kind of use this as a way of passing data into a prompt dynamically. So in the playground, it's not as important, but when I connect it to the application code, I can pass in a dynamic query based on a user input from a text box or context that's fetched from a vector DB into this. So in this case, the query that I'm testing on is in July, what was like the price of flour in Boston? And the text, by the way, that we've chunked is basically this text file here. So let's just run it real quick and see what happens. So this is running GPT 3.5 Turbo. I have a couple of prompts like this for generate baseline, which there's also a generate improved one that we can go through. But yeah, basically it's trying to see what the answers are. In this case, you'll actually notice it said in July, flour sold at Boston for $11.87 a barrel. This is actually not true. The $11.87, if we actually search for it in the underlying data, was the price in August, not in July. And so we can already see that our that this original prompt isn't going to work super well. But anyway, so once we have this AI config set up, what we can do is open a Jupyter notebook. And what I'll actually do is I'll just open them side by side just so we can see. And this is a notebook which you just install the Python AI config package. You download that text file, and then we'll do some very basic chunking. This I would not recommend in production. It's a very basic chunking strategy of just like breaking it up into fixed size 1,000-character chunks. And then we'll just put it into a Chroma vector DB. So if I just run this ingest, I think I've already run it, and I have this set up here. It just takes 30 seconds for this text file. And next, let's just run a query, right? So here I have a series of queries. This is, again, like I had hard-coded this in my AI config here as the query. But in my notebook, I actually can have like a set of queries, and this can also be coming dynamically from some kind of data source. And so let's just try running this. And so you'll see this is the fetched context. And then if I make this scrollable, you can kind of see what it's answering here. It's a pretty long-winded response here. The text does not provide specific information and so forth. And then the next part is let's run the eval prompts. So for eval, what we have is a couple of prompts here. One is, I mentioned the 4 metrics we're trying to find here are relevance, faithfulness, coherence, and succinctness. And so we're basically using GPT-4 to run the eval. This is a relatively common technique nowadays of using a generative AI model to evaluate a generative AI application. It works reasonably well in many cases, but even in this cases, you'll see it doesn't work perfectly. You still need to prompt engineer GPT-4 in the right way. So what you'll notice here is for the evaluate relevance prompt, we pass it the query and generate baseline.output. And this is a pretty cool way of just passing in data into an AI config and reference previous prompts and the outputs of that. And so you can almost create this like dependency graph between these different things. Sorry, let me just, I just realized I have 2 of them open, so I'll just close this and let me just open the other one here. All right. So in this AI config, I have a generate v1 and a generate v2, and this one is much better at running. Like you can see, this is much better prompt engineered than the other. So first, if we just run like our eval here, let's just run this to see what it returns. And so what this is basically doing is it's getting the prompts and it's calling each of the evaluate prompts in code. The kind of cool thing that you'll see is it doesn't actually need to do model. It doesn't need to figure out how to invoke, like in this case, it's calling Mistral, or in this case, it's calling GPT 3.5. You kind of don't need to encode any of that logic in the IPyNB itself. All of that is abstracted away for you within the AIConfig SDK. And so you can really just focus on the prompt engineering and the prompt kind of management part of it, and really just evaluate the different models without have to worry about like how to invoke different ones and change your code and go back and forth between them. Mayo, any questions you have on this so far?
Yeah, so I was kind of wondering, so like in a production use case, say a team or working in a company, they're trying to build a RAG app, and so they obviously one of the pain points is hallucination. So they're trying to modify the prompts to find the optimal prompts that work to reduce that. So I'm trying to link that problem to the solution here. So obviously, if the evaluation provides the results as we're seeing, how do you go from the evaluation to basically optimizing the prompts? So how do you get from, say, low accuracy prompt to a prompt that's optimized?
That's an excellent question. So a couple of things there just to break down the task a little bit. One is what we're doing here is kind of ad hoc eval, right? Like we have a specific query we're running, and then we're running a single time for each of for the response of that execution, and trying to figure out, is this good or not? So this works well as you're doing ad hoc eval, but kind of what you're getting at is for production use cases, there are a couple of really important things to improve on this. One is you want to actually run the same prompt multiple times. So you want to have trials that you have. So in this case, for example, I've set a number of trials where it will rerun the same query in batch multiple times. Here it's set to 3, but this should ideally be 100 or more. And you chart out the responses for the query. And you'll actually notice the generative AI model has a propensity to hallucinate, and it also has because it's not deterministic, it will, unless you set the seed to 0, it won't return the same response every time. And so you're actually kind of looking at like a statistically significant set of data. That's what you're looking for in order to figure out, is evaluation working well or not. And so in this case, just to show you, right, like I've set the trial number to 3, and we have, for the same question, what's the price of flour in Boston? You'll see we got actually 3 different responses. And so you can chart that. You can see how the percentages across for that query, how the evaluation looked. And you can do this across hundreds of queries. So then you have hundreds of queries that you've tested running hundreds of times, and you get concrete metrics around these different criteria that you care about as part of that. That's a lot more reliable than doing it ad hoc. But the important point is you can't, especially if you're running GPT-4 for running the eval, you want to get it right first. You want to do the ad hoc eval first to just have it in the right ballpark, and then you can iterate on it. And the second part that you're talking about is, okay, so now I have these metrics, right? Like this is what my relevance metrics are.
Mhm.
Sounds good, maybe not, I don't know. So how do I improve them? And that's actually like an optimization problem. So what we're working on, we don't have this fully baked in yet, is this idea that you can specify an optimization function. For example, you may want to say, I want to improve faithfulness, and you give it the way to calculate faithfulness, which is just the function that runs the faithfulness prompt, for example. And it can try to optimize the generation prompt. So in this case, it's like this one. And there are like a couple of ways of doing that optimization. There are model specific ways, and like for this kind of model you're targeting, the prompt engineering may look different. Currently, all of that has to be done manually. So here, for example, what I noticed was succinctness is not great for some of this. So my V2 version of that prompt, I added be extremely succinct as an example for the answer. And it does do a much better job. You can kind of see here, it's like having a single sentence, and it's very specific for the answer. But like currently, this is a little bit ad hoc, a little bit manual. But this is the iteration process is kind of hard today without having all of this within your developer environment. Now that I have it here, I can like very quickly switch from, for example, like calling generate. I have a generate V1 prompt, for example, here. I can switch this to generate V2 prompt, and I can very quickly like test out how the performance of the model is gonna change. And I can go back to my generate V2 prompt. I can like make changes here, and they will instantly reflect back in my code. That kind of inner loop of like testing model behavior separately in this playground environment, and then being able to use that in my production application, that doesn't quite exist today without something like AIConfig. And so that's what we're really hoping to help provide with this tool.
Mhm. So with the evaluation, it's the model that's generating the data set and also conducting the evaluation, right?
Yeah, and so there are 2 things there. One is for the evaluation here, for example, let me just open this relevance prompt. We actually pass it the query and the response from the generation step in, and so it will decide based on that whether like the answer was satisfactory or not. In the case of faithfulness, where we're trying to measure, does the answer adhere to the context from the embeddings that we fetched, we also pass that context in. And this is pretty tricky to get right without using something like a GPT-4, because what the issue is, for example, question answering is one thing, but if you're doing a summarization task with RAG, summaries are, how do you test if the summaries are faithful to the original data? It can be a little subjective. And so you kind of need a machine learning model to be able to make a call on that. And here it's a very simple kind of criteria that I've listed. You can go a lot more specific on the prompt engineering for the faithfulness metric too, and ask it to like look for very specific things from the context that you care about. Like maybe you want to make sure the dates are all right, and so that's like something you want to tell the model to focus on. And so it's still a little bit of an art, not a science, as you can tell, like with a lot of things related to generative AI. And the final part is GPT-4 is really expensive to run. And so for running evals, like I described, to like generate hundreds of metrics across hundreds of queries, it's going to add up. And so trying to like switch out to maybe a different, smaller model and rerunning those same metrics and seeing, is it gonna like do a good enough job for me, becomes pretty critical to just control costs as part of this process.
Is it possible to provide your own set of queries, or because say, in production, most teams already probably have an application running. They probably already have feedback from users, maybe through the UI. So they already have probably a data set of problem questions or problem queries, right?
Yeah.
So these are queries that you okay, there we go. So what? So you just pass
pass
it.
this data, exactly. And so here we have this run query function, and currently it's calling like queries of 0 here, and the queries are hard coded. But for an eval system for RAG, these queries are exactly like you described. They're coming from the observability system that logs user queries. And then also the result of the response of running the query is you can either rerun the query at evaluation time, or more realistically, what you want to do is track both the queries and the responses the model gave it in production in real time. And then using those logs and that data, you can just like run the eval prompts, because all the eval prompts care about, as you see here, is what was the query, what was the answer that the model gave it, and what was the context. And so these handlebar syntax for passing in data becomes super powerful because in this case, I showed you like being able to like hard code it here just to test it really quickly. But then in production, like you're saying, the same prompt can then just have this params that I pass it. Let me just show you real quick, actually. If I go to run query, the way that data gets passed in is all I do is I do like AIConfig.load, and I have my YAML file that contains all my prompts. And then I just do config.run. And config.run takes in the name of the prompt. So in this case, it's like generate v2, right? So it's going to run this prompt. And then you pass it the params. And so there's a query and the context, which are passed in as live data, basically, as part of this function. This is just code. So whatever the query is, wherever you loaded it from, it could be, like in my case, from this array, or it could be from Datadog or some kind of live data source that logs these things in production. You can pass that data in and just run the prompt. And that prompt could be like the generation prompt in this case, or it could be the evaluation prompt in this case here, where it's running evals. If we just go to this function, for example, where did it go? I think here it is. There we go. So this one is also, the eval prompt is evaluate underscore criterion. And so that's just like a simple way of saying evaluate underscore relevance. So it's getting the prompt name, and then it's passing this context in to the prompt that the prompt cares about.
Mm-hmm.
I can, if there's nothing else there, I can just like recap a little bit on what this enables a little bit, just to zoom out a little bit. And so now that you have AIConfig and you have this notebook editor that I just showed you, and all of this is in your VS Code or IDE environment. By the way, if you don't use VS Code, we also have this as a CLI tool. So you can do AIConfig edit and just, it will open the same editor inside of on localhost for you. So you don't need to use VS Code as a prerequisite, but we recommend it because then it's like right inside your developer environment. So once you have this, there are a couple of really powerful things that you get as part of that process, especially if you're looking to productionize. One is you can now store prompts as config files. So the prompts and the model parameters are now a config that can kind of interop with your application code pretty seamlessly. You can also like deploy your application code on Vercel or something, right? And then you could have these configs that are stored in Redis or in some live kind of real-time data store, and you can fetch them dynamically in the application code and when it's out in production and already live. And you can also swap them with different configs without having to redeploy your application. And so it creates this really nice separation of concerns between the generative AI signature of your application, which is the model you're using, the prompts, the settings you're configured the model with, and the application code, which is more about the core business logic, like the text box that accepts the user input question, for example. And so you can kind of separate those two things out, and you can have two separate people on your team kind of like building those two different parts. Like one is an AI engineer whose job is to figure out the best prompts that kind of like what we were doing, right? Like, how do you evaluate this? What is the best evaluation prompt? What's the best generation prompt, and so forth. And then another engineer who's like the full stack engineer building my web app, for example. And they can collaborate together now because they have this AI config artifact they can share and use and put in version control. And underlying all of this is like rapid experimentation. I really think that's the key part for generative AI right now, because it's so early, it's moving so quickly. Being able to try things out really quickly and productionizing them as quickly as possible is the best way of improving your application in general. And so having productionization and experimentation combined into a single workflow makes that like a virtuous cycle. And so I showed you this AIConfig editor. We'd love feedback on this, by the way. One of the opinionated things we've done, as you've probably seen in here, is you'll notice like it's a notebook kind of editor. It's not a chat interface. And so our opinionated stance on that so far has been chat interfaces are really great for people looking to use generative AI like as a chatbot. For example, go to like ChatGPT and figure out, create a travel itinerary or something. But for actually developing generative AI applications, you need a little bit of a more powerful visual interface. And notebooks are already like a pretty common interface for multimodal things. A Jupyter notebook, you can like render images, charts, audio, different kinds of MIME types. And we've built the exact same kind of flexibility of what the input and output types are and the interface into the AIConfig editor as well. But we'd love feedback and we'd love to iterate from here. And then finally, the SDK is kind of critical as well, because now that you have this config, you simply call config.load and config.run. There are a few other things in the SDK that for like things like function calling and more advanced ways of invoking these models. But at the end of the day, the key thing here is you reference a prompt, and the prompt logic and what like the settings and configuration for it are all stored in the AIConfig itself. And just to like cover it, so it's like I said, it's an open source project, and we already have a whole bunch of models that are supported out of the box, and we have a way of creating extensions. So either if you're using like a fine-tuned llama, for example, or you have your own internal model at an enterprise, you can just define what we call a model parser extension for it, and you just use the AIConfig SDK with your custom model as part of that. We'll add even more models as we go forward, but it's already out of the box, giving you a lot of choice on just trying out different models from different providers. And this I just showed you right now, and I just want to keep this screen a little bit as well, just to show you like if you want to try this out, you can clone this GitHub folder inside the AIConfig repo for like all the notebooks and the AI configs that I showed you today. And then also you can check out the AIConfig repo. We love contributions. You'll probably see if you go there, like there are dozens of PRs open, and I think over 100 GitHub issues. Several of them are tagged as good first issues. So if you're looking to contribute, you can start with that, and it would be super helpful for us as well, because we're just looking to improve this and get feedback on making this as useful as possible for developers who are like trying to productionize generative AI applications.
Awesome. Yeah, so just a few questions. So for people who, a lot of people kind of, especially not from a machine learning background, came into AI using, popular open source tools like, LangChain or, other SDKs, Llama Index, and so on and so forth. And so for those of them who are already using that in production, or already familiar with those frameworks and want to utilize this as well, how would that work?
So the good news is it's actually pretty straightforward. So for example, here I didn't use any of those frameworks for doing RAG, for example, right? like I defined my own chunker and my own ingestion, and I did it myself. But you can do this part with Llama Index and do the eval part with AIConfig, and it just works because it's simply config.load and config.run. The other thing we're working on is actually adding integrations so you can store the prompts you're using even with LangChain and Llama Index as AI configs. Then you can open AIConfig Editor, iterate on the prompts that way. And still, if you have that application in production using those frameworks, you can still interoperate between the two. The key thing, though, is in a lot of cases, all you really need is like running a model. And there are like, I think it's simple enough to call config.load and config.run, especially if you're starting from scratch to get started. And then what those frameworks provide that's really cool is integrations with different data sources and like vector DBs and different chunking strategies for RAG. And so we're just trying to figure out how to allow you to utilize those while using AIConfig for the other pieces of it, and especially the prompt engineering and prompt management part of the of your workflow.
Mm-hmm. So, let's say you run this, and I kind of alluded to this earlier. So you see your faithfulness, the score, and all of that. So what you're saying is right now there's no, and it's not just specific to you, it's just industry wide. There's no kind of next step from the figures. So obviously you can see what the figures are, and that's cool. But the next question is, okay, so what do I do next?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I think the hard part right now is eval is essentially still unsolved beyond the benchmarks. Now, there are benchmarks for models that do eval on specific tasks for general purpose models. But the issue is for your specific application, eval may look very different. Like eval may for you mean, is this post something that is trendy, or it's like a good marketing post based on some criteria of what good means for you and your use case. And so a lot of eval today for generative AI applications is very use case specific. This adds a little bit more structure to it, where at least you can document the ways you're doing model graded eval. How you iterate from there is still kind of manual, and we're working on making that more automated. One of the things actually is if you do have an eval function, even if it's like this model graded eval, and you have a generation function which contains like the prompt and the model settings, we want to do this thing that is similar to in predictive ML hyperparameter like sweeps, where you have some optimization function and you want to like tweak all the hyperparameters up to a point where it kind of optimizes the function you've given it. And you can do the same with generative AI model parameters. That's one thing we're working on, is like all of these different settings that you can tweak in for OpenAI or for other LLMs. If you gave it an optimization function and you gave it like this task of optimizing for, let's say, relevance or faithfulness, and it just did this parameter sweep of trying out many different permutations of these settings until it found like the local or the global optima for them based on what you care about, based on your criteria. That would be pretty cool. Like I would love to have is this like magic wand button here, where you like kind of select the the optimization function you want, and it kind of figures out how to improve the prompt and the model settings from there. And then you can even like, currently, for example, this prompt is running on any scale with Mixtral 7B, but you could give it like a series of models that you are okay for it to be. Like maybe it's GPT-4, GPT 3.5, Llama 2, maybe a fine-tuned model. And it could like figure out what is the best model given your eval function. So that's all work in progress. There's a lot you can do there, but currently the industry state of the art, kind of like you said, Mayo, is you try to figure out, is my application doing a good job or a bad job, usually with GPT-4 as the model that like does the grading. And then you're kind of trying to do it manually today of like figuring out, okay, maybe the issue is in my ingestion, and so I'll change my chunking strategy. Or maybe the issue is in the LLM generation phase, like I showed here, and then I'll improve the prompt engineering part of it. Or maybe it's like the original data that I gave it is not very good, and or it's not being processed very well. and you kind of have to like evaluate each step of that pipeline for RAG applications yourself, and then hope that you figure out what's going on. So hopefully by the next webinar we do together, we'll have more concrete ways of like helping you do that. But right now, it's very much what you described.
Yeah, it's basically like autonomous prompt engineering agent, right?
Yeah,
You basically, say what you want, and it will iterate over until it hits the criteria of what you're looking for.
exactly. And the criteria could even be like a composite kind of metric. So here it's just about quality that I showed, right? Like around retrieval, around faithfulness, relevance, etc. But maybe one of the criteria is cost. And so you want to like optimize on cost and relevance, for example. And so that you can get pretty complicated pretty fast. But that's what enterprises are currently both struggling to do, like developers who have RAG applications they've deployed. And also something they're really interested in, because if you can show that like you can get most of the performance, but with a model that's 10x or 100x cheaper than GPT-4, then you just save tons of money at the scale that enterprises operate at, where you're maybe serving millions of requests. And so those savings add up, and eval is probably one of the hardest things to get right today. And it affects everything, right? Because it affects how I build my RAG application, what frameworks I choose to build, what models I use, what my vector DB is. Like everything around it is built on whether my application is doing a good job or a bad job. And it's kind of funny that, the hardest part of this whole pipeline right now is figuring out, is my application doing a good job or a bad job?
Yeah, I mean, these big scale, large scale apps have tons of volume, and
Yeah,
so it's kind of like, how do we take that feedback from the user and iterate in real time?
exactly.
Because the
Exactly.
because the users obviously maybe engaging and not getting some results they want. And so
Yeah.
the manual way is you record that and you go to the back end and you go through this tedious process of testing the queries that didn't give the right answers, as opposed to some way for the model to just iterate on, okay, I got this wrong, and here's
Yeah.
my revised version of what the answer should be.
100%. And I just opened this slide, by the way, just to show you all the different things that you can kind of try doing in order to improve performance. Like people are trying to change from k-nearest neighbors to training support vector machine, or doing chain of verification, which is this technique of like trying to reduce hallucinations. There's a paper from Meta on that. You can fine tune the embedding model. You can like fine tune the LLM for generation. There's so much you can do, but underlying all of that is, figuring out where the problem is. It's almost like we don't have a debugger right now built out, which can tell us this is the pinpoint, this is the problem in my generative AI application. And these are complex pipelines, so it's going to take a little bit to figure that out. But I think eval holds the key to really improving performance and reducing costs.
Yeah. And so what other use cases do you like to showcase with AIConfig? I know we've done RAG. Is it able to work with multimodal? Sometimes people might be dealing with, documents that are a mixture of text and images and tables.
Absolutely. I kind of showed this earlier with the Hugging Face example here. This is just like this AI config I have for running different tasks from Hugging Face. And you can actually, like for a couple of models like GPT-4V, you can pass in multimodal in the sense of pass in image and text and have a single model operate across the two. Or you can do like use the AI config to create these prompt chains where, for example, you can like pass in data from a text to or image to text model, and then pass the generation from this, for example, like you can pass in the output of image caption, which would be text, into a translation prompt, and you could do something like image caption dot output, and this would then like create this multimodal prompt chain effectively, where you have like you take an image, and without even writing any code, actually you generate a caption for that image, and then maybe you want to translate that into like French or something. I think that's what this model is hooked up to, and that would just like work as a without even writing any code. I just built a prompt chain with 2 different models with using 2 different Hugging Face tasks. That's the kind of stuff AIConfig is super, super good at. And it's enabled because we have these like this notebook interface and these different prompts that are, it's not just a chat interface. So you can kind of like chain together different kinds of modalities and different kinds of models from different model providers all in the same place, which is kind of cool. You could even like pass in, you run a Hugging Face like local inference model. So this would be text to image that's like running using the Transformers SDK, and then do the translation using GPT-4 with OpenAI. I think my server is not working on this specific AI config right now, but the idea here is then I have like a couple of really powerful things. One is I have a prompt chain between an image to text and an LLM model set up without even writing any code. The second is I just got inference between a local model that did some like inference on my machine connected to a different provider and remote inference done on OpenAI, for example. And it's like a single AI application that I just built. And then in my application code, I can just do config.load huggingface.aiconfig.json and do config.run translation. And I don't need to worry about like how to invoke the model, which model locally, which model remotely, how to like call OpenAI versus Hugging Face. It just like does it for you. And so you can get really complicated and build really sophisticated multimodal apps using this kind of model. And we'd love feedback on this, by the way. Like this is pretty cutting edge stuff, in my opinion, because nothing like this quite exists with this level of ease of use. Today, if you had to do this yourself, you'd have to like import the Transformers SDK into your Python or notebook, and then like set up the right structure for how to accept base 64 encoded images, which is kind of hard, but you can kind of see here what it actually looks like under the covers. They're just attachments, and we have these like S3 URLs for referencing them. And then the output, you'd have to like parse the output yourself. So if you like look at what the output is, in this case, it's just text, but in certain other cases, like in a text to speech one, it's a base 64 encoded value. And it's a wave file MIME type in this case. But like we kind of handle all of that complexity for you. And then when you're ready and you want to share this with people, you can just do like AIConfig share, and you get this perma link for sharing the URL with other people. And then you can like share the AIConfig with the content that I just showed you. And I can like send this to you, and you can try opening it, and like because we have a file artifact that stores all of this logic and all of the inputs and outputs and the models, you can like kind of collaborate with it, and in a much richer way than what's possible today.
Yeah, this is kind of the part that I kind of caught my eye, and I said, yeah, I haven't seen anything like this. And it's funny because if you take away the VS Code interface, this looks like a product on its own. Like I could see people just paying for this on its own. I know you've got your playground separately, but because it solves a lot of problems here, like the problem of kind of testing, iterating, the problem of seeing results visually very quickly. It's just quick iteration. It saves a lot of time, and just a lot of logic that you would have had to do from scratch.
Yeah.
So I kind of wondering before we wrap up, what kind of use cases are you seeing people using this for? What kind of teams? If you want to name drop any companies, yeah, just an overview.
Yeah, we're working with a lot of enterprises actually. The thing that, as you can imagine, like what enterprises really care about is confidence in production, which is, can I version the things that I'm deploying so I can reliably look back and reproduce behavior in a way that I can like debug, or if I have like some kind of legal action, that I can have data that backs up and has accountability and provenance tracking. And so AIConfig enables them to do prompt management using an artifact that they can version control. that doesn't exist today, because today, like, all your prompts and models, like kind of what you said, to do all of this without a visual editor, you just have to write the code for it, and it's very laborious, but it's also like mixed in with your core business logic code. So it's very hard to reason over what are the generative AI pieces of it, when they change, how they change. Whereas a config, you can literally like track the version history of that config file, and that's good enough for like figuring that out. So we have a whole bunch of enterprises that are using this for prompt management, which is why I can't name drop them, because we need like approval from them to mention them. But the key things we're seeing people use AI config for are a lot of RAG applications, actually, where, because a lot of it does involve prompt engineering after you've figured out like setting up your vector DB and so forth. And then also for this kind of multimodal use case that I just showed you, a lot of companies are trying to switch to cheaper models, like they're fine-tuning Llama 2, or they're even just using like a base 13B model that works well enough for very discrete tasks they have. And so they usually have these prompt chains where some logic is handled by GPT-4 or GPT 3.5, and then other logic is handled by a different, smaller, very specific model. And so chaining all of that together and putting that in like a single simple workflow, that is what AIConfig really shines at today. And so that's the biggest use case we're seeing so far.
Awesome. Anything else you want to share before we wrap
No,
up?
I think first, like the thing you kind of mentioned that like the notebook interface and the IDE could be a product on its own. We're really excited about just contributing this as an open source project, and really seeing how much utility it brings to developers. And so we're really like focused on keeping it as an open source project, and uh, improving it based on people's feedback. So the biggest thing I would love is for folks to try it out and contribute ideas and contributions to the repo, but just give us feedback on whether this is useful for you. Is the notebook interface kind of a good iteration from traditional like just chatbot interfaces? And what are the kind of use cases you want to use it for, or you would love for it to do better at? And we're going to prioritize that feedback pretty quickly. So we just want to make a product people love to use and find utility out of. And so if folks can help with that, that would be superb for me.
Awesome. And yourself personally, if people want to get in touch with you, what's the best way to do that?
So I'm actually very available on our Discord, which is linked to in our GitHub repo as well, right here. I check our Discord all the time. But if folks really want to get in touch with me, you can also reach me on LinkedIn, or you can email me at this is my email. Don't misuse it, please. But if you really want to get in touch, and especially for collaborations, please get in touch. I'm always available there.
All right, awesome. All right.
And also, thank you so much, Mayo, for having me. Really great discussion, and also really looking forward to what the community thinks about AIConfig.
Yeah, looking forward to see where this goes as well. All right.
Awesome.
Cheers, Sarmad.